So, you think your loved one might be in a cult and you want to help them. You've come to the right place. In this video, I'm going to tell you what cult experts are saying might help you get your loved one out of a cult. And I'm also going to tell you what I think you should be avoiding if you're trying to help your loved one out of a cult. Let's talk about this. Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, my name's Andy Fellows and I make videos on cults, skepticism and making sense of life after the New Age. I'm a former member of an online New Age spirituality and pseudo-therapy cult, and I spent years believing stuff that made my life harder and ultimately damaged my relationships with my family and made me lose friends. Normally when we talk about cults, we're bringing skepticism to it and picking things apart a little bit, so this video is going to be a bit of a change of pace in that sense. That said, as ever, please do your own research, make up your own mind, and I've included my sources linked in the description. So one of the messages I've received most often since starting to talk about cults on this channel is, I think my friend is in a cult, how can I help them? So this video is going to be the answer that I give when people ask me that question and then some. And stick around for the and then some, especially if you've already asked me this question. I am going to be looking down at my notes as we go through this video. That's just to make sure that I'm saying what I want to say and getting things across in the right way. So please forgive me, there's a lot to cover in this video and it's going to go a lot more smoothly if I'm kind of looking down and checking my notes as I'm talking to you. Stick around till the end of this video, by the way, because at the end of it I'm going to share these 3 things with you that I think you absolutely should be avoiding if you're trying to help someone out of a cult. These 3 things, if you do them, might ultimately sabotage any progress you might be making and could actually cause your loved one to throw in with the cult even more. For now though, let's just talk about the things that you should be doing. So most of how we instinctively talk to our friends and family when we think that they might be under undue influence or in a cult might be counterproductive. The assumption is if we show them how worried we are or how much we care, then they might just snap out of it. Or if we show them how wrong we believe what they believe is, then they're just going to be like, oh yeah, you're right, thank you, cheers for that. Unfortunately, it's not that simple, and if you want to help someone who's in a cult, then there's a few things that you might need to know. First things first, you trying to help your loved one out of a cult is incredibly admirable, and it is 100% possible for you to help them out of the situation that they're in right now. It's possible. It's not definite, but it's possible. But I want to be super uber mega clear about something here. Even though you care about them and even though you want to help them, getting them out of the cult is not your responsibility. Their freedom of mind is their responsibility, and no matter what you do, you can only do your best to help them out of this. If it doesn't look like it's working, I want to encourage you to have patience, and I want to encourage you to take comfort in the fact that you have done your best. Also, I would say that really when you're around someone who's in a cult, the best thing you can do, especially if they're a loved one or a family member, is focus on your relationship with them as a person rather than trying to pull them out of this cult. We're going to talk a little bit about why that's worthwhile as we go through the video, but I also want to say, additionally, if you think you're in over your head, there are professional therapists who have the relevant knowledge who can help you with this. That said, let's talk about this. Be non-threatening. This first point is something that really paves the way for a lot of what we're going to talk about in this video, and we're also going to circle back to it later, so it's really important to talk about it now. The number 1 piece of advice that I'm going to share with you today, like much of what I'm sharing here, has actually come from cult expert Stephen Hassan. Be non-threatening. When you're talking to your loved one, if you think they're in a cult, the last thing you want to do is make them feel like this thing that's become the centerpiece of their life is something that you're actually against. It's not conducive to the conversation, and if they feel threatened, the chances of them really opening up to you kind of rests at close to 0. We'll talk a little bit about why being non-threatening is such a good idea later in the video, but just now, rest assured, gone are the days of aggressive deprogramming. We're going to be doing this softly, with care and consideration for the person that we care about. Protect your relationship with them. If any one thing has the potential to make a person more likely to leave a cult behind, I think it's an honest and open relationship with someone who respects their choices and beliefs, but is also concerned enough to ask questions about what they see is happening. As we go through the video, there's going to be a few examples of questions that you might like to ask, but Don't just take those questions and apply them necessarily straight away. Think about the context, think about the exact conversation that you're in with this person. It's important to recognize how significant it really is to protect and maintain your relationship with this person who is in a cult. It can be the difference between them throwing in with the group more and stepping away and starting to question the ideology and ultimately leaving the group. Short of throwing in with the group or doing morally questionable things in order to show your allegiance to this person that you love, doing what you can to protect and maintain your relationship with them is paramount. Connect with who they were before the cult. One thing that I don't think a lot of people realize about cult members is that part of turning a regular person into a cult member is a gradual form of indoctrination which can occur over a number of days, weeks, months, or even years. The end result of this indoctrination is a new personality crafted by the cult for the individual. This is called the cult identity, and it's a cult appropriate personality which has been generated for each and every cult member to help them survive while they are members of this group, and ultimately to perpetuate the group and the leader's position. And one thing that you'll notice about cult identities in particular is that they're all the same within the group. Pretty much every cult member is a version of every other cult member, typically taking after the leader or leaders of that given group. I won't go into exactly how a cult identity is fashioned here because it's just going to take too long. In short though, so much of it is turning human nature against itself in order to create a compliant and unquestioning follower of the leader who thinks and feels that they're doing everything that's associated with the group that they're doing by choice because they really want to. If you're interested in learning more about that, then I've included a link below to a video that I made a little while back about how cults make you believe, so you can check that one out after this video. It's a little bit of a longer video, but it's a good place to start if you want to sort of learn about how cults create these identities, and it also includes the accounts of 3 former cult members from 3 different cults whose experiences have a surprising amount in common. Something people tend to overlook about how cults work is that they totally consume a person's every waking moment. For most cult members, the cult has become their whole life, to the point where their opinion of life outside the group and their opinion of people outside the group is typically pretty low. They think about their own life outside the group pretty rarely, and when they do think of it, they do so with fear, scorn, or some other negative emotion that's been associated with it for them by the cult. And sadly, this applies to their own life before the cult too. Now, part of this is that they're very unlikely to have many aspirations for their future that aren't linked to the group or dependent on its map of reality. In fact, a lot of groups actively discourage thinking of life outside the group positively and demand, either overtly or covertly, total allegiance to the group, to the point where members are expected to live their whole lives for the group and have no interests outside of it. Usually they have a number of mystical or ethereal ways to justify this. That said, who they were before the group hasn't gone anywhere, even if the cult identity is out more often. So if you're able to spend time with your loved one, connecting with who they are underneath that cult identity is key. One of the ways you can do that is by getting them to remember the good times that you've shared together throughout your lives, or the things that you have in common. Remind them of the times that you laughed together, or the things that you did together that you remember fondly. Ask them about their hobbies and interests that aren't dependent on the group, and ask how they're doing with them. Do you still paint? Do you remember when we used to sing together? Whatever happened to that band we were going to start together? Questions like that. Learn how cults work. A lot of us think we know what a cult is, and by extension how it works, just from the various depictions that we've seen in the media or in fiction. But naturally, as with just about anything that you see on your screen, TV, the internet, movies, whatever, there's more to it. And the version that you see on the screen doesn't always really reflect the reality of the situation. Doing your own research into what constitutes a cult and how cults work is integral to being a positive influence on your loved one while they have a destructive group's belief structure influencing their thoughts and feelings. Knowing what to look out for is super important, and being aware of what a cult red flag looks like is honestly something that I think we could all benefit from being aware of. Learning about how cults work is typically best best done from experts and trained professionals rather than randoms on the internet, which is why I always try to include my sources in the description so that you can reference what I'm referencing in sharing this with you. Also why I'm always really clear that I'm not an expert, because I don't want anybody getting the wrong idea. So along with this video, I've also included a link to a page on my site below with a list of resources which I'll update whenever I find something new and worthwhile. Everything I've listed there I've either read or watched myself and have found useful. I've included books I consider to be must-reads as well as additional reading and some websites to check out too. That link's in the description for you to check out at the end of this video, but one important mention is Stephen Hassan's Combating Cult Mind Control. Hassan has written this book in a way that is accessible for readers who have no prior knowledge of psychology or how cults work. It's a good place to start with lots of useful insight into cult dynamics and how to help your loved ones who might be caught up in a cult situation. It's available as audiobook too, if you're like me and you're not much of a reader. I've also included a number of things from that book in this video already. Hit like, by the way, if you're finding this video useful as we're going through it, as that really helps the channel. Learn how their cult works. So cults tend to fit a pattern. They tend to have a certain kind of power structure, they tend to establish control over behavior, information, thought, and emotion, and they tend to show clearly identifiable signs of destructive influence. Despite the claims that they are the one true such and such, or that their group's the only group who has this commonplace value ramped up to the nth degree, most cults are embarrassingly unoriginal. They have a lot in common, but the stuff that separates one group from another is the stuff that could really make a difference when you're trying to get through to your loved one and try to understand where they're coming from in the kind of things that they're saying. And really it could be the difference between getting through to your loved one and actually helping them out or not. Thankfully, there are numerous resources on the internet available to help you. If the group has been around long enough for people to leave the group and speak out, which does happen more often than not, then the stories, the accounts, the testimonies of ex-members is going to be a good thing to check out. It's worthwhile taking into account. You'll probably find that there are some correlations between ex-members' accounts which could give you some insight into how things are really working and sort of look past some of the biases that the ex-members might have, having, been ex-members of the group. And if the group is more well known, then it's possible that other people who are talking about cults or even cult experts have spoken about them explicitly and can provide you with some insight into how the cult works based on their own ideas, expertise, whatever. On the page on my site that I mentioned, I've actually included a number of resources for the group that I used to be involved in case the person that you care about is involved in that group now. It's a good place to start. I'm doing my best to compile those resources for people who want to learn a little bit more about the group. If there's no material available on the group other than what the group has made available themselves, then I would say I'd err on the side of caution if you feel inclined to investigate some of what the groups put out themselves. Please consider that material made freely available by a cult is used to entice new potential members, bypass their critical faculties, and slowly indoctrinate them. Reading or watching any of this material should be done with the utmost caution and with a lot of regular breaks to digest the kind of stuff that you're reading and hearing and pick it apart. Regular breaks when you're looking at cult material are really important. You need that space between what you're seeing and what you're thinking about what you're seeing in order to evaluate it. So that's actually something that I'm going to be speaking about with a specific example from my own experience in next week's video. So make sure that you subscribe and hit all on the little bell so you'll get notified when that comes out if you want to see it. But when it comes to looking at cult material yourself, I cannot warn you enough. This material is usually part of a process of indoctrination that new members are subjected to overtly or subtly, and it doesn't matter how immune you think you are, it could have an effect on you. In fact, if you feel confident that it won't affect you, I would say that that may not actually even make a difference as to whether it does, and that may even actually go against you. Equally, if you're going through a difficult time in your life and you're looking at this cult material, then it could literally just as easily affect you the same way that it would any other non-cult member who doesn't know anything about cults. So this feeds into the next point I'd like to make, but please, if you do intend to familiarize yourself with a cult's material, do so with caution and with the intention of critical evaluation. And if no other insight into the material is available, then please study how cults work before you even start to look at an actual cult's doctrine, ideas, propaganda, propaganda, material, whatever it is. A lot of this stuff is intended to assault your worldview and infect your mind with their map of reality, knocking out the supports and leaving you dependent on them. It's nasty stuff and it shouldn't be taken lightly, especially if you have no prior knowledge of how cults indoctrinate or how undue influence is established. Ask good questions. An active interest in the development of your own skills as a critical thinker and a skeptic is crucial to analysing how cults worm their way into a person's head, and they are just as integral to helping your loved one out of a cult. But returning to our first point here a little bit, any attempt at skepticism or critical analysis is incomplete without a non-threatening approach to those who believe in the things that you're being skeptical or critical about, especially if your intention is to sway them away from that position. More on working around defensiveness in a few minutes. If you want to ask your loved one questions, inquire as to the nature of the group, non-threateningly, and then seek insight into how the group works. There is, however, a time and place for this, and if you just come out with 100 questions out of nowhere, the onslaught alone will put their hackles up. Let them come to you and find organic, non-threatening ways to ask questions similar to something like, what happens when the leader is wrong about something? If someone disagrees with the leader, what happens? If someone has a complaint or a concern about the leader's methods, is there some way to ensure the complaint or concern is addressed adequately? You might also raise concerns about all or nothing statements like, this is the answer to everything, or everyone should know this, by injecting a touch of nuance into the conversation without disagreeing with them or making them feel like you think they're wrong in what they're saying. The intent is to be gentle, to avoid abrasions, and to plant seeds of critical thought in your loved one's mind without putting them on the defensive. The intention is to make it so that the control of their situation and their life in general is in their hands rather than in the cult's. Part of how a cult operates is by shutting down their followers' critical thinking and giving them no mental or physical space to object to or evaluate the group's map of reality. Again, that's something that I'm talking about next week a little bit more. They make it as close to impossible as they can for members to inspect what they're being told. They make it as close to impossible as they can to pick it over and to see whether it's true or whether there are inconsistencies. So try to ask these questions and subtly highlight these inconsistencies without expecting anything of your loved one. Honestly, I think sometimes the best way to highlight an issue that you've just raised with something that they're saying or doing is to sort of let things fall silent, not keep throwing things back at them, so that the thing that you've highlighted is sort of hanging in the air for a few seconds and then swiftly move on and talk about something entirely different. Anyway, I was going to say, I was thinking about that time that we went for that walk down by the river. Do you remember? And that's preferable to being like, see, this thing that you believed's wrong. See, I proved it. It's not going to help that. Right, let's move on to these 3 big don'ts of trying to help your loved one out of a cult. We'll cover this, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to just tell you quickly about something that I think is super important to remember anytime you're trying to help someone out of a cult or get through to someone on this kind of an issue. So make sure you stick around for that. Don't bombard them with anti-cult literature. The desire to order books and get them sent to your loved one's doorstep to try and snap them out of this thing they believe is palpable. You want them to get it right. You want them to see. You want them to understand that this thing that they believe makes no sense and they've been sucked into something that's basically inside out. You want them to see that it's a harmful way of living, that maybe even this thing is doing some harm to them, and you want them to snap out of it. Chances are that's exactly the way that they see you as well. You know how you feel when they try to show you their cult material, or they try to convince you that their leader is right about something, or how you feel when they drone on about something that the leader's said, right? You know that feeling. That is exactly how they're going to feel when you try and shovel anti-cult literature down their throat. That is exactly how they're going to feel when you try to tell them how literally their new best thing in the world, which is how a lot of these people see their group, their best thing in the world. That's exactly how they're going to feel when you try to tell them that their new best thing in the world is rubbish, it's nonsense, it's a cult, it's bad, it's evil, whatever. It's not going to help, I don't think, and honestly, as far as I see it, it could probably make things worse. It could do more harm than good. It could make them throw in with the group more, could make them cut themselves off from you, any number of things. It's just not worth it. Don't try to philosophize them out of the ideology unless you've got a million years to spare. They know the ideology better than you. They've studied it longer than you and harder than you, and as a consequence, they understand life, themselves, you, the universe at large, better than you could ever dream to. If you make the conversations you have with them about the beliefs, you're probably not going to win. Every group has its map of reality, each as faulty and as inaccurate as the next. Any holes in it can and will be explained away and or overlooked by followers of the doctrine. As far as I'm concerned, you can't win doing this. It's absolutely pointless to even try. It might be fun, you might enjoy it, and if that's your intention, then I suppose, you know, your little debate and whatever, it can sometimes feel like slamming your head against a brick wall, but, you know, if it's sort of sports your intention, then I guess that's okay. But if you really want to help someone out of the group, it's probably not best to try and sit there and philosophize them out of it. That said, there's a difference between running up to them with incisive questions intended to drag the flaws of their beliefs kicking and screaming into the sunlight, and responding with healthy and reasonable skepticism whenever they bring ideas to you themselves. In the event that your loved one wants to share what they believe with you, something non-threatening along the lines of, I want to make sure I understand you, so can I ask you a few questions? And then proceeding to ask questions which highlight some of the flaws in what they have just said, that could make a difference. But just remember, try to be non-threatening and try to not make them feel like they're wrong in what they're saying or believing or doing. Let them come to that themselves if they are in fact wrong. Lead them to it rather than just trying to bombard them with it and smack them around the face with it, because that's not going to help anybody. Don't call it a cult. This is something that I say all the time on this channel. It's a mistake we've all made once or twice, but it's something that we really need to stop doing when we're trying to talk to people and connect with people. The word cult is useful, but it's not great if you're trying to help someone out of something. It's just not. This ties in so closely with being non-threatening that it's kind of part and parcel. There's a good chance that this group is your loved one's lifeline, their answer to everything, the one thing that makes sense to them, and the one place that they go where they feel like they belong. And because the word cult has so much baggage, because it's something that's a derogatory term, at least in the English-speaking world, then you're not going to be able to get through to them necessarily if you just chuck that word at them, right? It's going to put them on the defensive, and they're going to feel like they need to protect this good thing they've got from you, and you're trying to help them, so it's just going to go against you. And one thing that some people do overlook with cults is that part of how cults work is that they generate this really intense us versus them mentality, which cleanly and decisively divides the world into people like us and people against us. Something I'd add here though is that there is like this third category that I reckon is in the middle of this us versus them, and it's the potential to be us category. To cult members, us is everybody inside the group, and them is usually people outside the group who will do harm to the group, or they believe, who the cult members believe intend to do harm to the group, to its members, to the leader, whatever. In some way, them is against. They're against us because they're not us, basically. And each group is going to explain this in any number of ways. They've all got their own maps of reality. They've all got their own mythology about what them really is and why they are them and not us and blah, 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 all that kind of thing. But there's this third group, this sweet spot, if you will. The people who know no better, but could. The people who, with a little persuasion, may just come over to the right side. To use Cambridge Analytica's term, the persuadables. It's a neutral position to hold, and it's a useful one. In the minds of cult members, everybody outside the group is a potential recruit until they throw in with them. Sometimes there's this mythology about, oh, they'll eventually come back to the way or whatever, but typically, as soon as you throw in with them, that's it, you're the enemy, right? But there's this other group who haven't yet thrown in with them, who aren't yet one of us. And to a cult member, the urge to recruit somebody is irresistible. So, if you want to help a person out of a cult, the thing to be seen as is a persuadable, as a potential recruit. It's as a persuadable that you're in the opportune position of being able to innocently ask questions which cut right to the heart of the matter and highlight the glaring problems with the group, with its map of reality and so on, while maintaining your non-threatening, neutral disposition. Also, if you're the one who never called it a cult, apart from that one time when you did and they set you right, before you knew better, then when they start to see holes in the cult's map of reality, who are they going to come to? Are they going to come to the one who's always screaming about the cult they're in, or are they going to come to the one who sort of calmly sat there, listened, and asked them good questions, even had a discussion with them about it? One last thing. Here's what I think is the most important thing to remember when you're trying to help a loved one out of a cult. These things take time, baby steps. Indoctrination is a slow and gradual process that can take days, weeks, months, even years to fully take a person over. Don't expect things to change overnight. Don't expect anything you say or do to be the thing that causes that moment that the spell breaks. Try not to expect your loved one to snap out of it anytime soon. Every seed of critical thought has the potential to grow into a little bit more autonomy and a little bit more self-trust. And every time you have a conversation with them where you're able to non-threateningly raise valid concerns and where things don't dissolve into an argument or leave the two of you feeling at odds with each other is a win. And by listening to them and understanding them, and by gently highlighting some of the issues with what they're invested in, then you actually might be doing more good than you realize. You might actually be helping them more than you realize to regain control over their lives and to break free from the destructive group that they're involved with. I'm sharing this with you in the hope that it helps. Please check out some of the other videos I've made if you want to hear more of my perspective, and also that link in the description that I mentioned in the video I mentioned earlier, both below, so that you can check them out after this video. As I say, that link to my site is full of resources on this subject. These things take time, but there is hope and things can be better for your loved one. Nobody knowingly joins a cult, but people leave cults all the time. I'm Andy Fellows, and I'm here pretty much every Thursday with a new video on cult skepticism and making sense of life after the new age, so make sure you subscribe to the channel to see more, hit the bell to be notified. In the meantime, please be kind and ask good questions, and I'll see you in the next one.